Welcome to my talk on how to convert Figma components into Flutter widgets. My name is Jens. I'm a co-founder of Widgetbook and also a passionate Flutter developer. So at Widgetbook, we are building a storybook for Flutter, and we also aim to improve the collaboration between software developers and designers. So to just get a feel for the room, by hand raise, who here is a developer? Okay, that was unexpected, to be honest. Now it gets more difficult. Who here is a designer? Me a little bit. Okay, a few, interesting. All right, and who here doesn't really know why he's here? All right. Okay, our open source developer is not so sure about it. Okay, but let's see how this goes. All right, I will head right into it. So let's build a Flutter app. So let's aim for a dark and a light design. Let's aim for German and English localization, as well as support phones as well as tablets. We will build 2 pages. You can see the home screen on the left, and we will build a basket page for basically collecting some items for our shopping application. So this is a rather simple application, not a lot of pages, not a lot of requirements. But if we look at basically the space of available screens that we get from already these 2 pages, it's like a huge amount because we have light, dark, German, English, and also different font sizes. So we now kind of have a problem on how we can implement and test this as a designer as well as a developer. So let's look at the case of the designer first, even if there are not so many here. So previously, the designer, if he wanted to support 2 themes and 2 locales, he had to define 4 different components. Those can have multiple variations, but it was kind of impossible to say, okay, I have 1 component and that can switch between light and dark. And then you build more complex pages from those. And if you want to support even these 2 themes and locales for the screens as well, it gets complex quite quickly. It's hard to maintain, also hard to scale when it comes to we want to have even more locales than this. So doing this approach is kind of impossible for or has been quite of impossible for the designer. So let's look at the developer. So as a developer, we have way better support for locales, for themes. That all works quite well in our Flutter framework. But the problem is, if we now want to test this, we might need a lot of devices. We might need to do a lot of configuration regarding setting up these devices for theming, for locales. There's not really an easy way to switch through them in a very quick and efficient way. So while our current approach is doable, it is really time consuming. Okay, now we have a solution. So in Figma, we have new features that have been released about 2 weeks ago on a Figma conference called Config. And those features that are particularly interesting for designers as well as developers are the introduction of variables and development mode. We will look at both of these in my talk and see how this will influence our development flow. On the right side, we see a storybook solution called Widgetbook that we can use to catalog our widgets and define use cases, kind of like test cases for our components. And it will also allow us to hop through different locales as well as themes and also different devices. But let's just look at a quick video on how this works. So first, we will go with Figma. In Figma, you can now define a component. And on the right side in the layers panel, you see that we can switch what we call collections to different modes. So on the tokens collection, we see that we switch from light to dark. On the localization collection, we switch from English to German. And on the left side, you can then see that the component is updating regarding what particular mode and collection you have currently active. In Widgetbook, this looks very similar. So we have already implemented the application, and now you can switch in Widgetbook between different locales and themes. So that now allows you to also quickly see how your implemented component or screen will look on different configurations. And this functionality in Figma as well as in Widgetbook is extremely similar. So basically, developers have the same tools as designers, so we can really match the design now to our implemented version in our code. In the following slides, I will now guide you through a process on how we can use the new Figma tools as well as Widgetbook and introduce them to your development workflow. All right, you already know the requirements, but let's talk about a workflow that a lot of companies are going. So the workflow is that we collect all the requirements. That's something that we have already done. And then we dive into designing the application based on our requirements. So first of all, we want to have a design system, and then from there we can easily build our components and our screens. After the design is done, we will go into the design handoff process, where the designer is basically giving the developer access to their design resources. They can also collaborate in this phase to get the design in the direction that the developer also thinks it's right. But from there on, we will dive into development and see how we will implement the components that have been given to us from our designer. And in the end, we obviously also want to make sure that the developer hit the design correctly in code. So we want to make sure that reviewing is also part of our workflow. And if it doesn't work out, we have to do another iteration. Okay, so a quick overview of what the design system is. So we developers all know that a designer really went far and beyond and really made fancy, really good looking screens. But in the end, to us developers, it looks like that we have the same component, like in three little different ways. And it's kind of annoying to implement those because it's not really reusable for us, and we kind of implement the same component in three slightly different ways. So as a developer, but also as a designer aiming to scale an application to maybe more complicated use cases, we want modular building blocks that we can reuse and also being efficient in implementing and designing with those existing components. In addition, a design system can make sure that our users have a consistent user experience. That does not only mean like color or design-wise, but also that all the flows have like a consistent feel and are not like changing from one page or one feature to another. And in the end, a good design system can also improve communication and collaboration between designer and developer. So it makes sense to have that as well. Okay, so I already talked shortly about what we had in Figma before. And I would now like to dive into how the new variables feature will change the workflow for designers as well. And this will obviously also influence how you as developers will operate and work with your designer. Okay, so the new feature it's called variables. So for developers, it's nothing new. So we had this for more than 50 years now, but designers, they finally caught up. Only took a few decades. But yeah, it's like a huge feature, and it also looks a little bit like it's more developer focused than actually designer focused. But I think in the moment the designer uses these features properly, it will improve the workflow for both teams. And let's first look into Figma and see how those are defined, and then how we can use those as a developer as well. So As you can see in the top right corner, this feature is like brand new, also still in beta. Not everything is working perfectly right now, but still it's like a promising view on what will come in the future. So this is a new dialog that has been introduced 2 weeks ago. And what you're seeing here is basically how you define new variables within Figma. And on the top left corner, you see the collection selector, let's say it. So variables live in different collections. For example, we have tokens collection active right now. Those go into the direction of having a theme, but we could also define a collection for localization, or we could also go into the direction of defining data sets so that we kind of have instances that we can reuse on specific pages and also change the way on how designs look. But let's keep at our theming, our tokens. And on the left side, you see you see what I call namespaces. So this allows you to group specific variables into one subset so that you can easily understand this. So in this case, we picked a really simple design system and splitting everything up into text, spacing, radius, surface, which goes into the direction of colors, and the borders. From other design systems, like for example, material, you know it more from a component perspective, where they split up the design system into cards, text, buttons, and so on, and you can customize it that way. Since we have an easy application, we picked a way that is now a little bit simpler to understand. Okay. Further to the right, we have the variable definition, so basically the names of the variables. To developers, I don't need to explain that too much. It's like a kind of unique identifier that I can reuse, and whatever value is in there, that is what we see on the right, can then be used or consumed by that component. So in this case, we have 2 different modes, light and dark mode. And as you can see, for example, for the primary surface, they also have different values. You could also have different modes, for example, for radius, that can, for example, do a more edgy design or a more rounded up design. All right. So how can we use these variables in Figma? So previously we had tokens and we're able to bind those tokens to specific properties. But now we also have variables that we can bind to properties. So in the case of the fill property of this card and the background of the card, we can now bind this variable to the background and will then accept the value of the currently active mode. On this slide, we see that right now for the tokens, the light mode is active, but we can change the mode at any time by clicking the drop down. Then we see a selection of specific modes. So here on the top, we see auto. The auto mode, which defaults to light, is one that will inherit the properties of its parent component. So that means if I embed this component into a screen, and the screen has, for example, the dark mode, and I have my component on auto, it will inherit the dark mode from my parent component, which is quite cool if I want to build more complex screens, so that I can quickly change the mode or the theming of the whole screen instead of just having to change the mode for every of these subcomponents. But here we change from just light to dark, and we will immediately see how that will influence our card. We can do the same thing for the localization or even for the items. So I defined a set of items. Right now mango is active, but I could also switch it to, for example, avocado, and then also the naming will change here. This will also help you to, for example, prototype or even basically create your mock data if you're implementing. So in this point, I think this is like a really crucial change that has been done by Figma. And let's look at what this means for you as a developer. So now you can way better preview theming, localizations, devices. and make sure that everything works just from your Figma file. Since the whole theming localization thing is way closer to development now, we will also have like way better collaboration because things are just so similar. At the same time, your designer now has massive control over the developer's code. So I'm kind of predicting that predefined design systems like Cupertino or Material that we currently have in Flutter might go away because of the fact that designers can now build the whole design system in Figma, and the whole thing isn't so complex that we couldn't generate it just from there, so that we can have basically a custom design system for every application. In the end, that doesn't mean that Material is unnecessary in any way, but it means that we can also adapt an existing and great design system and adapt it to our likings. If we need to change some properties, if we want to add a specific behavior, that could be now very, very easily done. Yeah, and based on variables, this will basically introduce better reusability, and will also open up access to better code generation in Figma, what has been currently really difficult. But this is not part of this talk, so don't worry. Okay, we now managed the very first step of building the design system. And let's see that we now finish the design. So with all the variables defined, we can now create all of our components using this feature. And this will make it a lot easier for the developer to read through the components and see what properties have been used. Okay, design is done. Now let's hand off to us fellow developers. This previously has been done by other companies, for example, Zeppelin. Some might have already used those. In Figma, we now have a very similar feature to that. So here you can see a section that is basically the thing that is currently selected with the blue border. And on top of it, we have a button, a very little button. And if we click this, it will set the status of the section to ready for development. So within the tool, designers can now basically tell the developer what's ready to be implemented. Okay, the question is now how do we developers get notified regarding what's done or not? Figma also introduced a plugin for Visual Studio Code. This is called Figma for Visual Studio Code. And this will give us access to the development mode of Figma right out of our IDE. So here we can then see with the bottom left button that kind of looks like a layer button. And this will open up a selection of ready to development components. So right now we only have the one. So we will click this, and then we will jump right to the component in Figma. So this is like the component that we now would like to implement, but I think you know really well how to do this. So we will go with a quite easier component so that I don't waste anybody's time. But I think it's still interesting to see how the new workflow will influence development and how we can reuse the variables of designers as a developer as well. So the design handoff is therefore done, and we can go ahead with implementing our very first component. That's what you have all waited for. But before we do, we will start setting up widget book so that we can, nice. So that we can catalog our colors, typography, components, and screens. We will start with colors and typography. And before I give you like a whole introduction to our documentation, I will keep it quick, and you can read up on this after the presentation. So we basically have 3 packages. The most important one is widget book. but we also have support for easier maintenance via code generator. And for that, you want to use a widget book annotation package as well as a widget book generator. Okay, we need a little bit of setup. So the way widget book works is you launch widget book as a separate standalone app. That's why we define a new main method. So you can decide, do you want to run your application? Do you want to run widget book, or do you want to run both at the same time? Once that's done, we wrap our widget book component in a stateless widget to make sure it's hot reloadable. And the one important part is basically the directories. Here's where you define your catalog of widgets and components and define your use cases. This variable is coming from our generator if you want to use it. We will see later how you then define new use cases by using the generator. And beside that, we also have add-ons that you can use to customize widget book to your liking. So in the code here, you see that we have a theme add-on that will be used to inject our custom theme into widget book so that all the components are also properly styled. But you can also add a localization add-on or even your own add-on that you can implement from scratch in case you have like a really specific behavior that you would like to reach with widget book as well. Okay, then we run the code generation. We run a Flutter run to launch widget book, and then it's up and running, and you see not so much. The reason for that is we don't have any components or use cases cataloged yet, but we will go there right now. So we have our design system. So we are looking at the surface namespace right now with all the colors, primary, secondary, and so on. And we can now code this design system. So we just create a new class. This is very similar to if you have ever defined your own custom theme. This is very similar to what we are doing right now. So we create a new subclass with primary, secondary, color, and so on. And from there we can define a more complex class that will be the app theme. So here we see all the namespaces again with spacing, typography, radius, border, and surface. And some of those values are already predefined because they are not changing from one theming to another. From this class, we can now define our first theme, for example, the light theme. And all these values are also now coming just from the variables of Figma. So that we now have a really good match between Figma and our code, and also regarding what our theming can offer value-wise. Okay, now we define our first use case. The important part is the add use case annotation that basically defines how this builder function that we use to build the components and use cases is displayed in widget book. So the type is our theme, and the name we can pick ourselves. In this case, we say it's color collection. And then we just build widgets to showcase the colors in widget book. And this then looks like this. So on the left side, might be a bit small, you see that we now have the app theme component with a use case that is called color. And in the middle, you will then see all the colors so that you as a developer can compare that with what the designer has implemented in Figma. And you could also share this widget book with your designer, and then he can check himself to make sure that you have not fooled him. Okay, we can do the same for spacing, so that you as a developer see how the spacing system works. You could also share that with another developer that just joined the team to get him up to speed even quicker. And the same is the case for the typography. So you see all the fonts available. Okay, sounds good. So now we have cataloged all the theme in widget book, and we can go ahead with implementing our very first component. So for that, we now use the plugin from Figma. And for that, we pop off the property panel. This now looks really wild, but we will just skip ahead and go to assets. the cool thing here is that you now see all the dependencies basically of this screen. So you see what subcomponents are used within the screen, and if you haven't implemented those, you can do that now, and you have a way more refined and guided process regarding what to build first to be able to build a whole screen. So we will build the app bar together. It's not a complex component, but we will see how this is different from what you might have been used to. Okay, we now zoom a little bit in so that we see the whole thing better. And you already see in this graphics that you now see the variables that have been defined again. So we see that, for example, the vertical spacing is a small one. Okay, but let's head into code. On the right side, you see something that is very common to you from the developer, from the web development, where you can immediately see the padding, the border, and also the size of a specific component. On the left side, you will get some code. Right now, you're seeing CSS. The reason for that is that this whole feature is still in beta. They have Flutter support as well, but only in Figma, not in the plugin right now. I'm assuming this will change soon, but as of this talk, it's not there yet. Okay. Let's go ahead and define our very first component. So with this new component and the new file, we make sure that we also match the naming of our designer. And currently, that whole component is empty. So to me, this looks a lot like a row. So I will add a row to define this app bar. And then we will add the spacing. And from the Figma tool and the code, you can now see that both of these properties match. So in Figma, we have spacing extra small, and that's exactly what we also use in code. So basically, there's not a lot of thinking going on my coding side. I just use values provided by the designer. And previously, you might have been guessing, okay, what exact variable do I use? What does this refer to in my app, in my theming? That's not longer the case. If you match your theming perfectly, so if you match the theming in code perfectly to the one in your design system from your designer, you will not have any trouble basically dereferencing any values that have been defined in Figma. The same can now be done for the vertical spacing. And yeah, you can, oh, sorry. Yeah. Okay, so now let's fill our row with the app icons. We just assume for this talk that those already exist. So it's just a spaced out icon. We add the app icons with a menu icon, a text that is currently a placeholder, and also yeah, an icon for the bag. Okay, so at this stage, one thing is still left. We need to space it out a little bit. And here we are using CSS code to see what is like the spacing between the specific components. That's the first and last time we see the CSS code, and the reason for that is just because I have a screenshot-based presentation and I can't zoom in, but you can also see that value if you zoom around in the Figma tool, and then it will enlarge and you can see what those values are. Okay, so that has been a lot of steps, maybe a lot of code, maybe hard to follow for you. So we might not be able to see any longer where our component is visually. So what we do now is we define a new use case for widget book to see how our component is currently doing regarding our design. So yeah, we have a new use case now that is of component type app bar, and we just give it a default name. For the builder function, we just return the app bar as it currently has no parameters. We will change that later, but until then, we can now look the first time at how the component looks like. Okay, this kind of looks like it, but not completely. So the icons look good, but the text is not the one that we have seen in the design. And also it should basically extend or expand to the whole row. Okay, let's change that. We first want to change the text style that is used. So we can now select the text style in Figma plugin, and now see on the bottom right corner that we use a text style that is called logo semi-bold 20. And we match exactly this value in the code as well. Okay. In addition, we will add a parameter title that we can use to basically customize how this component is used. So on the home screen, we have a specific name, but on the basket screen, we might have a different name. So we make it customizable regarding the parameters. Now we have one more parameter that we haven't had before. So our use case is now a little bit outdated. Therefore, we need to provide a value. And so that we don't need to provide a specific value, we are using what we call in widgetbook knobs. And knobs allow you to define a dynamic input for widgetbook where you can change on runtime what the component will look like. It's quite a cool feature because then designers and developers can change the input parameter on runtime and see how this will affect the component. So here you could, for example, test for really long text, really short text, and see how your application behaves in those cases. So it's kind of a little testing tool as well. Okay, right now our component still does not behave correctly. So we will add an expanded to make sure that the text expands over the whole space of the row. And then it already looks more like it. Okay, so we now finished implementation of this component, but let's see how well we did. So we didn't really use so much brain here to implement this component. We basically copied a lot of values around that have been defined by our designer. And we now are really keen to see how accurate our design was. If you put this on top of each other, you will see that especially the font is a bit blurry. So this doesn't seem to match too well, but everything else is properly aligned. That's a good thing. And we also need something for the designer to complain about. So let's go ahead. But before we do, let's also look at the more complex scenario from our screens. So here again, fonts are a bit blurry because we haven't spent too much time on really making it pixel perfect. But if you look at the card, you will see that most of it aligns extremely well. The only thing that differs a bit is that the card is maybe 1 or 2 pixels larger than it should be. That might also be due to the fonts, but we could optimize that later if it's really important. But if you would put it like side by side, not like on top of each other, you probably would never notice it. So in my opinion, that's really cool and was also quite surprising when I implemented this, because I really had like to put in no effort to implement this. I just copied all the values from my designer, and it turned out to be almost pixel perfect, which is quite cool in my opinion. Okay, so we can now go ahead, implement our whole app using widgetbook. So you now have a bunch of components, and you can really do that in every detail. And the great thing is that you now have like this huge catalog that you can either give to your designer, to another developer for reference, even for a new starting developer that wants to get used to the code base, or also to product managers or clients, so that they can just check out a single page. In addition, you can also define logic into widgetbook so that you can check specific use cases regarding how the code then behaves in scenarios. So for this basket screen, you see that if I reduce or remove all the available items from the basket, the page will completely change to a different state in the end. And with this functionality, we can also check how the application behaves in scenarios that are more of an edge case. Because if we need to mock, for example, every backend that is used in our application, or to basically fake it to test all this functionality, it's really annoying. With widgetbook, we can easier define these cases and make sure that also components that are not so often used are displayed properly and in all the correct configurations. And remember that we can still change the locale or the theming to see how this performs in other themes or locales. Okay, so development is now done. We are really quickly here in writing code. So let's make sure that the implementation is really correct, also in the eyes of the developer. So we now want a process where the developer can also have easy access to our code, to what we have implemented. And this can be quite difficult. We either have to build the application, or the developer has to be able to handle Flutter to even run the code. So there can be a lot of scenarios that are quite cumbersome for the designer. It might also slow the whole team down. So let's see what we can do. Besides our open source package, we also worked on what we call the widget book cloud. And this gives you opportunity to share your widget book easily with your designer. So we have a CI/CD integration that allows you to upload all your widget books, also in different versions. And then we will give you a guided review process on how you can make sure that designs and the development of the design are completely aligned. So how does it actually look? So here in our application, we see that we have a new pull request open that adds a new feature, the home screen, that we have talked about the whole time. We created a new branch for that is called feature home screen, and that will be merged into the staging branch. I created this pull request, and we have basically one component that changed within this pull request, and we can now check it out by clicking the card. Within our tool, you will now get a side-by-side comparison of Figma, which is to the left, and of widget book, which is to the right. So since our implementation was already very similar, it's hard to spot differences, but designers are always really keen to really optimizing every last pixel. So our designer now makes the comment in our tool that the font really looks a little bit thicker and is not what she expected in this case. So now as a developer or as a designer, I can now reject this change by clicking the reject button, and the developer will now get a notification that the designer wasn't happy and that we still need to make any changes. So we can now go into another round of implementation and make sure that everything aligns. And then you make a new upload to widget book, and then you can see if the problem is now resolved. So that's where we are aiming to making the collaboration of developers and designers a lot better. Now we covered all the cases, and the talk is kind of done. Obviously, there's a little bit more. So we obviously also have our team here. Benita is a designer that you have seen the designs from. So if you have any questions regarding this, ask her about Figma, variables, design in general, or she also likes spicy food in case you also fancy that. We also have Yusuf here, our open source developer. He worked a lot on widget book the last months to release a new version, and he's very keen on open source. And he's also really good at writing funny migration documentation. So if you need some things to spice that up, then ask him about that. Okay, but enough about our team. Maybe you have now questions regarding the talk. We have a microphone in the middle, so you can step up and ask whatever is on your heart.